1871, the O'Leary farmstead, which is where poor Mrs. O'Leary's cow was blamed for kicking over a lantern and burning down most of downtown Chicago. It was just off a little ways over here in the distance. They both eventually, they were publicly lifted of blame for starting the fire, but unfortunately they died years and years before that happened. So we don't really know what started the Great Fire in town. But what we do know is at that time, the majority of the city was all built out of wood. There were thousands of wooden, prefabricated balloon frame houses, and there were about 55 miles of planked wooden streets if you added them all up, because we didn't pave streets yet. And in October of that year, there was a drought. So if you can imagine this, you have all of this dry wood. Something right over here set off a spark. Flames shot up. Well, on that day, there were really, really strong winds. They were so high, they were able to blow the fire across the river down here. It set downtown on fire. It burned over 80,000 buildings. At the time, people thought this was the end of Chicago as a city. A poet, John Greenleaf Whittier, he even went so far, he wrote the city a eulogy in which he said the great city of the West, at that time, is dead. But fortunately, they were able to rebuild the majority of downtown within only about 2 years or so, and so luckily there was a pretty speedy recovery from that disaster here in the Midwest. Oh, I love this when you go down this far if you want to. Over here to the right, there's a building. It's got an orange painted north-facing wall. It's by the second radio tower. This is the vicinity near where the O'Leary farmstead was, where the fire began, where we now, almost poetically, we have the Chicago Firefighters Training Academy. So we train some of our brave firefighters over where the city started to burn them. That has to be superstitious, for good luck, just in case. But we're going to start to turn around in the south branch of the river, and if you'd like to, take a look, and you'll get your first glimpse from this amazing view of what was the world's tallest building until 1997. That black glass and steel skyscraper looming up in front of you is the Sears Tower. And if you want to stand up to take a photo or come up front at any time, go right ahead. Just be really careful, but feel free. The Sears Tower in front of you is 1,454 feet. So that building is 110 stories straight in the sky in front of us tonight. It was built by the same brilliant team, Ruth Graham and built Hancock. So we're looking at what was the world's tallest building until 1997. And then a building was completed in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. It's called Petronas Towers. And then all the architects in the world, they kind of argue back and forth for a number of years over if you measure the height of a building by the radio towers, the two big white towers you can see way up on the top, or if you measure by the tallest floor that someone can walk on inside. Well, then in 2004, a building was finished in Taiwan. It's called Taipei 101, and that completely surpassed Petronas Towers and the Sears Tower in height. So the argument for tallest building in the world, for the one you can see in front of us tonight, it's over. You may have read, they sold the naming rights to this earlier this year to a London-based insurance holdings company called the Willis Group. So we're supposed to start calling it the Willis Tower. We'll have to see if anybody in town does that. It's such an important part of our architectural history. It kind of hurts to change the name of it, after years and years of calling it by something else. They also want to paint the entire building silver. If you've ever wondered, though, especially as you look at this from this great view, how on earth you build a building at this scale? The Sears, it's built using what's called bundled steel tube construction. And so these architects and engineers, they've taken these huge bundles of steel tube, and what they do, they keep all the vertical supports in that design as close together as possible. So the weight of the building, it's being held up along a rigid exterior wall. So what this means is that then you don't need to go build an interior cage of metal, which is how you typically hold the weight of the building. So this design, it's really, really efficient. It requires about 1/3 less steel than a building typically built vertically at that height normally would, and it gives this building a little bit of flexibility. There is an intentional wind sway built into the Sears Tower. So if you're way up at the top of that and it's very, very windy, you can feel the building sway to accommodate the wind downtown. I I think that sounds terrifying. Speaking of terrifying, if you read the paper earlier, they added glass observation balconies to this building, and they're open today for the first time ever. So if you feel like it, you can go up onto the 103rd floor of the building and walk out onto a sheet of glass and look all the way down. I will not be doing that. So if you do, come back and tell me about it. We'll be able to see them in a few minutes. There's a building a little up to the right of the Sears Tower. There's a silvery robed lady with her back to us. She's way up on top of the Chicago Board of Trade. If you were to go up and look at that more closely, it's a series of grains. That's where you get the word cereal from. So she's doing a really Art Deco thing. She's letting us know on the outside of the building what they're up to inside of it. They're trading the futures of all of the harvests of the farms of the Midwestern side here. You can see a little closer to us and a lot shinier the newer postmodern annex that Helmut Jahn added on in the mid-1980s. It echoes the shape of the roof of the original. It has that little white octagonal shape up on the top, again letting us know something about the inside of the building from the outside, because the trading floor, if you ever go in there, it's built in the shape of an octagon. It's kind of really neat, because you have what was the tallest building downtown from a little after World War I until just a little after World War II, the Board of Trade, pretty much right beside the world's tallest building from 1974 until around 1997. So you can compare these two really, really different kinds of designs, pretty much parallel. You know, once you go and you build the world's tallest building, you kind of give all the other architects in the world a huge challenge. What are they supposed to build next to that? And so you'll see a building a little closer to us. It has this really busy exterior. It's almost pinkish colors. This was when New York architectural firms answered to what you might put next to the world's tallest building. It's named 311 South Wacker Drive after its address here downtown. It's designed by Cohn, Pedersen, and Fox. Crane your neck way up on the top of that, you can see a white, it almost looks like a drum or a birthday cake. If you look for that in about an hour, it'll be lit up by thousands of bulbs. It's one of the brightest things in the skyline. This was so bright when they first built it that started to disturb the migratory sounds of some birds. So all these other cities along the lake, they started calling up Chicago, yelling at us to turn that down. So they think that they made it as busy as possible on the exterior, and then they went and they put the brightest thing they could up on the top of it to try and steal as much attention away from its neighbor, the Sears Tower, as they could. Look back up at the Sears and you can see those glass observation balconies up there. Sometimes you can see a camera flash going off. You can tell there are people up there. In just a minute, you can peek in between these two buildings over here to the right.